Timing can be everything in fantasy football, and we have two wide receivers that are hitting their stride just in time for the championship weekend, thanks to improved offensive situations. The first stop we have to make is the Baltimore Ravens, where rookie wide receiver Zay Flowers has become the centerpiece of the offense since the loss of Mark Andrews in Week 11. And to get a better understanding of what Flowers has been able to accomplish since Mark Andrews left the lineup, we can head over to fantasylife.com, where you guys can check out the Utilization suite of tools for free. Go over to Game Log and click on the Ravens. I've isolated down to the last 4 games without Mark Andrews, and we can see 7.8 targets per game, leading the team with a 24% target share. Now, his air yards are not great. They're at 61 per game, 21% for the team, but he's making up for that because he's working underneath and most of his targets are deemed catchable. 84% of the time that Lamar Jackson has looked at Zay Flowers, it has been a catchable pass, and that helps make up for some of the air yards that we are losing. The other thing working in Flowers' favor is he has 4 targets in the end zone over these 4 games. That's 40% of the team, and that's an upgrade from where he stood earlier in the season. And of course, the fantasy points have already started to follow along with 16.3 points per game since Week 12. So with an understanding of the new role that Zay Flowers is now in since Mark Andrews has left the lineup, I wanted to take a look at his utilization as well as his efficiency and create a comp group based on the last 12 seasons of data. And the average was 14.5 fantasy points per game with a wide receiver 21 finish. So that 14.5, it's lower than the 16.3 that we've seen in the 4 games without Mark Andrews for Zay Flowers. However, when you drill down into some of the individual comps within the group, I do think there's a lot of room for optimism here. We've got Amon-Ra St. Brown in 2022 when he averaged 16.7 points per game. In 2021, Chris Godwin with 17.6 points per game. And then finally, 2019, Cooper Kupp at 16.9. So when you put all of this together, I've upgraded Flowers to a low-end wide receiver 2. However, based on the comps we just discussed, there are scenarios where he has the upside of that wide receiver 1, and that's going to make him really hard to keep out of lineups in the fantasy football championship weekend. If you're getting to start Zay Flowers as your wide receiver 3, I think you're going to be in a really good spot. And if you are playing DFS this weekend, $5,600 over on DraftKings. So Flowers still is underpriced in my opinion. I think he should be a low $6,000 to mid $6,000 price option, and we could get a boom game against the Dolphins if they can force the Ravens to need to score more points and air it out. If we get a game where Lamar Jackson has to throw for 300 yards to win, Zay Flowers could have a monster performance. Of course, with our good friends over at DraftKings, there's more to do than just play DFS, because football is more fun when you are in on the action. And this week, we've teamed up with DraftKings to do just that. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets instantly when they place their first $5 bet. That's right. It's that simple. Just download the DraftKings app, sign up using the promo code DEBRIEF, DEBRIEF, and place your first $5 bet. The crown is yours. And for the second player we're going to discuss, we're going to stay with the theme of young wide receivers. And we're going to go with year 2 wideout Chris Olave from the New Orleans Saints. A guy that we had high hopes for in 2023. Started off pretty good. Got into a little bit of a lull, and it seemed that most often we were just talking about his air yards rather than his fantasy points. However, a recent development in New Orleans now has us looking at him more like a wide receiver 1. Now, we're going to dive into Olave's utilization here in just a moment, but what you're going to see is it's been consistent throughout the season. Really, any way you want to slice it, targets, air yards, it doesn't matter. He has been a consistent performer. But the big difference has been about his chemistry with his quarterbacks, more specifically Derek Carr. Over the first 9 games, only a 65% catchable target rate per Pro Football Focus. That was one of the lowest in the league for guys with similar targets as well as average depth of target. Now, over the last several games since week 10, that number is up to 79%. And the fantasy points have followed along. Over that stretch, 17.8 points per game versus only 12.8 over the first 9 weeks. Now, taking a look at the game log view for utilization with Olave, you can see what I was talking about earlier. This is a player that's been really consistent, averaging 9.2 targets per game. You can see he's gotten to 10 plus in 7 games. Now, he's had a couple of little down games, but the floor is 5 targets. We rarely see that, so very healthy from that perspective. And then air yards, something that has never been in question for Olave, averaging 131 per game, 40% for the Saints. That ranks 8th out of all wide receivers in the NFL. Now, when we look at end zone targets, he's at 26% with a total of 10 on the season. Honestly, that's a little lower than you would expect because he is the guy that Derek Carr looks to in critical situations. 31% of the third or fourth down targets this year have gone to Chris Olave, and here in recent games, he's typically at 40% or higher. So I do think the touchdowns will come back around, but if not, like we've still got the air yards, we've still got the targets. Olave's very capable of scoring in big play fashion. And then from a fantasy points perspective, it has come up here recently, 14.9 points per game. He's currently the wide receiver 19. And when we take a look at the comp group for Chris Olave based on the data from the last 12 seasons, it actually lines up really well with how he's been performing as of late. The average wide receiver scored 17.8 fantasy points, finishing as the wide receiver 11. Now, for some of the closest individual comps in the group, I really drilled down to exclude guys that had a ton of end zone targets because we have seen that be a little bit of a challenge for Olave in recent weeks. I do think, again, it's going to turn around, but just in case it doesn't, what did this group look like? And in 2016, we had AJ Green average 18.6 fantasy points per game. In 2015, we had Odell Beckham Jr. averaging 21.3. And in 2014, Jeremy Maclin at 17.3 fantasy points per game. So ultimately, when you take all the factors and you put it together for Chris Olave, I have upgraded him to a low-end wide receiver 1. And I truly believe he has the upside to be a slate-breaking type wide receiver. He gets the air yards, he gets the targets. We know that big play ability is there. And we have a potential playoff game type of scenario this weekend with the Buccaneers. If the Bucs want to stay in the playoffs, they've got to win. If the Saints want to keep their playoff hopes alive, they have got to win. And we also know that the Buccaneers' pass defense has been very suspect. So if there's ever an opportunity for Chris Olave to go absolutely nuclear, I think it is in this game. Over on DraftKings, you can still get him for $6,800. Yeah, the price tag has come up over the recent weeks, but still, I think you can make the argument that he should be priced closer to options just below like Mike Evans. I think Evans is $7,700 to $7,800 this weekend. I think mid 7,000s to low 7,000s is where Olave belongs. So I think there's still value at $6,800.